Good morning, all. Today, our topic of discussion is the myasthenia gravis disease. First of all, what do you mean by myasthenia gravis disease? Maya means muscle, asthenia means the weakness, and gravis means dangerous. So, it is primarily a disease of the neuromuscular junction where there is the fluctuating weakness of the muscles, and sometimes it leads to the dangerous condition of the body. Next, what is the cause or what is the pathophysiology of this myasthenia gravis disease? Cool. So myasthenia gravis disease, it is primarily a disease of the neuromuscular junction, especially on postsynaptic membrane. Antibodies are presenting to the acetylcholine receptors. So when the antibodies are presenting on acetylcholine receptors on postsynaptic membrane, so automatically, so the decremental response will be seen at receptor potentiality as well as the action potentiality, which leads to the weakness of the muscles. Next, where the weakness will be seen. So the weakness is commonly seen on orofacial and bulbar muscles as well as the proximal muscles of the upper limbs as well as the lower limbs. Next, so it is commonly is seen in middle and adult age, especially in the females. Next, so next, what is commonest presentation? Bilateral or unilateral ptosis will be the presenting complaint or commonest presentation of the myasthenia gravis disease. Good. So along with the levator superioris weakness, so it also causes weak other extraocular muscles are also affected and leads to the diplopia and strabismus. Sometimes, so the facial muscles will be affected. The sometimes so the swallowing muscles are affected, so which leads to the dysphagia. Sometimes the laryngeal muscles will be affected, which leads to the dysphonia. So along with the cranial involvement, so it leads to the proximal muscle weakness. So why the proximal muscle is commonly affected means, so the number of acetylcholine receptors are more on neuromuscular junctions of the proximal muscles are more. So when the muscle mass is more, so when the muscle fibers are more, automatically the number of neuromuscular junctions are more, so the number of receptors are more. So when the so that's why, so the proximal muscles of the upper limbs as well as the proximal muscles of the lower limbs are commonly affected. Which means which means so this weakness of the proximal muscles, especially so difficulty in combing will be commonly seen, especially on early morning. Next, and which means so the repeated movement causes the decreasing or decremental response or decreasing action of the acetylcholine receptors. So that leads to the weakness. Along with that, so there is weakness in the proximal muscles of the lower limb, especially the hip flexors will be affected. Next, so along with that, extension of the neck as well as intercostal muscles as well as diaphragm muscles as well as the abdominal muscles will also be affected, as which leads to the dangerous condition of the body. Next, what are investigations? Simple. So nerve conduction studies. So the which means the repeated or evoked receptor potentiality or amplitude were decreased in the nerve conduction studies will be seen. So which means so when the repeated stimulus was given, okay, so but the response was gradually decreased, which means so there is consumption of acetylcholine is more, but there is no deformation. So there is no time to deformation of the acetylcholine, especially on synaptic space. So that's why whatever the repeated movement causing the weakness. So that's why the weakness is more on evening time, so when compared to the morning time. So which means on evening time, so the muscle becomes weak due to decreasing the number of acetylcholine receptors. So that's why after rest, so the muscle power was increased. The muscle power was increased because of formation of the new acetylcholine receptors was there. But when the repeated stimulus was there, so when the contraction was continuous, automatically the weakness was progressing. Next, so what are the commonest and important bits in myasthenia gravis disease? First of all, the most important point is myasthenia gravis is primarily a disease of the somatic. It is not the autonomic. which means so the best example is, so in myasthenia, ptosis will be seen, and strabismus will be seen, and related diplopia will be seen. But a pupillary reaction will be preserved, which means so the autonomic functions will be preserved. Next, okay, next it is a disease of the postsynaptic membrane. It is not the presynaptic membrane like Eaton-Lamberton syndrome. Next, so antibodies are present to the acetylcholine receptors on postsynaptic membrane. Antibodies are present into the acetylcholine receptors on postsynaptic membrane. Next, the most important point is the fluctuating weakness will be seen, or fatigability will be seen, which means on repeated stimulus, on repeated work. So when there is no time to formation of the new acetylcholine receptor, new acetylcholine uh, uh, new acetylcholine neurotransmitter is not there, so automatically weakness will be seen. Next, yes, so the weakness was improved with the rest because time is there for formation of the new acetylcholine. Plus fluctuating weakness, and fluctuating weakness, which means sometimes the weakness was increased, sometimes the weakness was decreased. As weakness was increased with a repeated movement, and weakness was decreased with rest. Plus, and the most important time, and the most important point is, as weakness was more on evening time, so when compared with the daytime. So these are the commonest and important bits on myasthenia gravis. And the most important point is, as nerve conduction studies are very important, and decreasing the amplitude of the repeated stimulus, or decreasing the amplitude of the nerve velocities or amplitude is the characteristic feature of the myasthenia gravis disease. Okay, thank you.